Good evening and welcome to another one of our book events. It's been, do you know what? It's actually been a few weeks since we've done one, so it feels a bit weird doing virtual, having done a few physical events more recently. So it's actually rather nice. I'm actually looking forward to virtual carrying on. Lissa, Harriet, do you agree or not?
No, I never want to see anybody on Zoom ever again. You know, present company accepted. So.
I somehow expected that.
Zoom down. I don't mind because I'm on holiday with my children, so this is a rare break from, you know,
nice.
Fossil museums.
Fossil museums. Preach, yeah. But yeah, I don't mind it because I really don't like being on my own all day. So I've done a few things and it's okay, but it's a very weird energy. It's a totally different energy and you have to G yourself up. Whereas when you're doing a live event, which Lissa and I will be doing later in the year, guys, it provides its own energy. It's weird going into a bedroom, shutting the door and, you know.
Yeah. But it's the sort of thing you can do whilst you're on holiday in Devon.
Dorset, yeah.
Dorset, that's where you are, sorry, Dorset.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And let's just... let me just bring some sort of formality to this. Jamie is here. The wonderful Jamie Fewery lives around the corner or down the road, next town from me, and has helped me out with so many interviews. Thank you, Jamie. And Jamie's going to be taking charge of this. Audience, please use the Q&A function. I suspect you've all done a few of these things by now. So about half past the show, I will come back and I will be putting your questions to our lovely panelists. So without further ado, let me hand over to the wonderful Jamie Fewery.
Cheers, Ben, and welcome everybody. Yes, so this evening, I thought of this earlier, and I'm sure people have already said it before, the Magnificent Evans. Have people done that? No one done that before?
No, you're the first person.
T-shirts done.
I think you should. I mean, yeah. I'm a copywriter by trade, so it sort of never leaves you, the kind of instinct to kind of spin some line. Anyway, so Harriet and Lissa. So Lissa, the author of 6 novels, 3 books for children. Most recent is V for Victory, which is I've called it a kind of conclusion to a loosely tied together trilogy, but I'm not sure whether it's a conclusion, and because we spoke last year and you said it was kind of a conclusion to that, but then we talked about the nature of it, whether it is a trilogy or not. But some of my favorite books of recent years, that also includes Old Baggage and Crooked Heart. And Harriet, the author of, we were just discussing this, whether it's 12 or 14 books, but certainly a number of books, an impressive number of books. The most recent of which, I've got a proof copy here, The Beloved Girls, which Marion Keyes described as a gorgeous epic, and it's published this Thursday. That's right, isn't it? It's this Thursday. So before we do anything else, everyone should probably raise a glass of whatever you have to celebrate the publication. Sadly, I just have a glass of water.
Oh, Jamie.
And water in a Scrabble mug.
Oh, well, there we go.
Cheers. I'll have myself a glass of rosé.
We are on holiday, so you know, absolutely appropriate that you should be drinking rosé. So yeah, so first things first, I think probably the best thing I could do is just hand over to probably Harriet first, just to talk about this new book, give us the kind of the overview of it. I'm going to try as much as I possibly can throughout the next half hour or so not to drop any clanging spoilers. I actually reread the end of it today to make sure, just to give myself some pointers of don't say this, don't say that. So I'll hand over to you, because you'll probably do a better job than me of describing it without spoiling the ending.
Well, The Beloved Girls opens when 2 girls meet when one of them goes to stay with the other one at this kind of ancient, quite weird manor house in Exmoor on the North Somerset coast, and they're about 12, and that's the sort of prologue. And then the action opens. Don't worry, I'm not taking you through it chapter by chapter. The action opens in the present day, well, 2018, pre-pandemic. We can get onto that in a bit, I'm sure. Pre-pandemic, when this very successful barrister, Catherine, lives in North London. She is really successful. She has a really nice house. She's got 2 children. She's got a lovely French husband who does all the laundry. And you start to see that things aren't quite right. You don't believe things she tells you. Some stuff she starts lying about, and you realize she's not presenting the full facts. And this woman starts turning up at her place of work and just appearing, and you're not really sure what's going on. And she goes away with her husband to France for the weekend. Well, they're supposed to go away, and he books tickets and they meet at St Pancras. They get to St Pancras, and by this stage she's kind of sort of unraveling, really. And she sees someone in the crowd, and then she says to her husband, I'm so sorry, I've left my passport at the office, and the office is just around the corner. I'm just going to dash back and get it. And he says, oh, Catherine, you're hopeless. She says, I promise, I'll be back in half an hour. They're really early. He's always early for everything. And she vanishes, and he never sees her again. And so you go back to the summer of 1989, when this girl, Jamie, arrives to stay with this family she's been to stay with before, including this girl, Kitty, at Vanes, this house. And it's the summer where everything in the past that has come to this point where this woman, Catherine, is trying to cope with it many years later, unfolds. And that is what the book is about.
Very good, very good. Yeah, when I was there was a lot of, the thing I've noticed in reviews is people saying the word layered, and there's all sorts of layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of different things. So describing it in kind of a snappy way is a complex thing to do. The first thing I would say, and V for Victory, is this. What do you describe it, Lissa? It's kind of the conclusion. It's a loosely connected trilogy, and it centers around a couple of very compelling characters. This one is towards the end of the Second World War.
Yes, that's right. It is. I wrote it so it could be read as a standalone, but I think it's probably more satisfying if you've read at least one of the preceding books. I wrote a book called Crooked Heart, which was set in 1939, and it was about a small boy being brought up by a former suffragette in a house in Hampstead Heath. And when she dies, he is evacuated to St Albans, to the house of a woman who is really no better than she ought to be, V, who sort of exists slightly on the wrong side of the law, and they become a kind of partners in crime. And when I finished that book, I went back and I wrote a book about the former suffragette, Mattie, and then I jumped over Crooked Heart and wrote V for Victory, which takes the same characters, apart from Mattie, who's dead in it, takes the same characters to a conclusion in 1944 to 5 and ends on VE Day. And I think, yes, I think it is the conclusion. People have been very nice and said, you're going to write more. And currently I'm not, because I was very happy with the last page. But it's about the last year of the last 6 months of the war, when London is grimly sort of settling in. Victory is coming, but meanwhile, V2 rockets are dropping onto the city, causing masses of death and destruction. It's the coldest winter in living memory. There's a shortage of everything in the shops, and it's about sort of grimly getting through the present in order to reach the future. Really,
it's also very funny.
That's good. That's the best thing you can say to me, Jamie, because I love. There's nothing I like doing better than crafting a funny line. But it was very lovely in that I was able to pick up the characters that I liked very much, a boy Noel, who's 15 in this, and the woman who's posing as his aunt, Vera, the one who's no better than she ought to be. But I was also able to cherry pick characters from the previous 2 books. Who did I want to come back? Who did I want to follow up? And there's a whole load of little girls in old baggage that are now 26 in this book, and was able to bring back my favourite characters, the twins in it. So it was lovely to find those voices again. That was a real privilege. I'm currently trying to write something new, and God, they're all new.
Yeah, I know. It's tricky, isn't
hard,
it?
You do that every time, Harry. I've had a real privilege, going back to the same characters for 3 books now.
But I was going to ask about character, actually, to both of you. Beloved Girls has got a huge kind of cast of characters. There's lots of, because it spans so many decades, you've got all sorts of people coming in and out. This as well, you just said, you've gone back to the same characters, but if you look at the kind of the cast list, if you were to create a trilogy of films across those, you'd have a lot of people. What makes a compelling character to you both? What's the kind of person that you think? Because when my thing for coming up with characters is that, like, if they stick around in my head for a little bit and I can start to think of their story, who they're like, then I think they might be worth writing about. Are there things that oh, this is like in the Beloved Girls, the central character has a lot going on. It's a very compelling character, but how do they get built in your own minds?
Well, I don't know what Lissa would say, and I'd be more interested to hear her answer, to be honest. But I think it's a cross for me between people who you've already decided are part of the novel, so the two main characters, the Beloved Girls, and people who, I don't like it when authors talk about their characters as if they're real, but to me they do feel quite real. People who pop up and take on a life of their own. So there's a character halfway through the book who is Sylvia's mother, Hester, who's in the 1959 section. And I wasn't really sure what was going to happen in that section. She just walked into it and I just knew her straight away. And with Catherine, for example, I had to do quite a lot of work to make sure she was believable, because she's quite a blank person for various reasons. And actually, I'm proudest of her in a way, her subtlety. This author calls own book subtle. It's hard when you're putting quite a lot on a character plot-wise. And it's hard when someone isn't black and white and shades of grey. And the comparison I always use when I'm doing kind of creative writing talks or whatever is, the only reason Silence of the Lambs works is you want Hannibal Lecter to escape. You have a tiny modicum of sympathy for him. If he was just a straight, boring baddie, it wouldn't be an interesting book. But there's a way in which, and that's the genius of the book, you are captured by him and you are a victim of his in a way. And the way the doctor taunts him and the way you see he's really clever is partly what makes him a really great character. If bad people are just bad, they're just bad. Look at V. V is just a really multi-layered, interesting woman. She's not one thing or the other. It's much more interesting when you say of people, they're like this. That's when you start to believe that they're real.
Mm.
Yes, I mean, I think, I don't know, I sort of jump into my characters' heads really, and I spend lots of time in my books doing internal monologues. That's how, and that way I can actually have characters who aren't necessarily that articulate, because in their heads, like most of us, they're more articulate than they are on the outside. And it's finding that character's internal voice and finding that I can build on it. That is the key for me, I think. I mean, I don't always find them easy. I remember in Crooked Heart, V's got a 19-year-old son called Donald, who's utterly charmless. And I did find it quite difficult building Donald from the outside. But the base characters, you keep on finding new things about them as you write, and they make you laugh, and you want them to succeed, and you believe in them, and you want them to be in scenes, and you want that character to meet that other character. And that for me is yes, you're never struggling to find something for them to say, because they're a whole universe inside their head.
And so I try and I don't follow book Twitter as much as I once did, because I find it quite exhausting. But there was a thing the other I know, it's so measured, isn't it? There was a thing the other day.
It's my main job, to be honest.
I know, I haven't I used to chat to you all the time on Twitter, and I
haven't spoken to you
for that very reason. And that's why it's so nice to see you this evening, because I haven't seen you, person I've never met, for over a couple of years. I do find it exhausting. But there was it's the only thing I sometimes go on and look it up on the internet, like a nan, to see what Lissa's been up to. She's the only thing I missed about it. Sorry, go on.
No, she's been tweeting. That's me.
There's a thing in there, people talking about the idea of a likable character, because there's been authors complaining that they get bad reviews because of likable characters.
Yes.
Do you feel you have to like your characters, or I had a review of one of my books that said, great if you like arguments, and it was because both the characters are so abrasive. But for me, that's compelling. People who are V, I agree, is a great character, because she is multi-layered, multifaceted, flawed, very funny, you know, a bit of a grifter, but kind at heart, and all the rest of it. You wouldn't say, oh, she's very likable. And that idea of having to like someone that you're writing or reading, do you feel like any need for that, or is it more important for you to have?
I don't have to like them. I think I have to love them, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I know.
There's a character in a book I wrote called Their Finest Hour and a Half, who's a vastly pompous actor called Ambrose Hilliard, who is just awful, and I adored him, and I couldn't wait to have him on the page again. So he's not by any stretch of the imagination a likable character, but he is a character you want to meet. It has to be compelling, perhaps that's the word. Yeah, compelling rather than likable. Just likable sounds too bland, but I do have to, you do have to invest in your characters. You want to know what's going to happen to them. You want a good outcome, the best outcome for them that's possible. And that isn't always possible. Yeah. Do you like yours, Harry?
I do. Yeah, I do. I like all of them, but I am aware that my earlier books were called more chick-litty, although I never particularly thought of them as chick-lit. And when I was published much more as a chick-lit author, there was this thing about she's a horrible person. I hated that girl. This thing that kind of women have to do the right thing. You're not allowed. And actually, I think we've moved on because the landscape's changed. But this idea that she's such a cow, I couldn't stand her. And I think quite a lot of that discussion might be rooted in, it's kind of sexist, and it's girls being sexist. They don't like girls who break out of the, oh, she should be doing this, she should be doing that. She wasn't very nice, or she was a bit individual. I never really trusted her. And it's funny when I don't look at my Amazon reviews anymore because I don't find it particularly helpful. But I used to really look at them when I was, I'm sure we all did, oh, wow, from some feedback. And quite often it would be stuck on this thing, which is, I didn't like her. I didn't like her. I didn't like her. And you want to say, no, but like, there's no tension if someone just skips through life like Fotherington Thomas going, la, 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 la. It's not a thing. And it's really hard to write someone who is just entirely good. They're really boring. That's why all of Dickens's heroines are literally the most boring people in the entire world. No one remembers Dora. Everyone remembers Miss Action.
Oh, my personal least favourite, and Nicholas Nicklby's sister, Kate. God, she's so wet. Yeah. So I don't, and I like writing difficult women as well. I sort of like that. The older I get and the less I sort of think, right, we'll do this, and that's why Mattie is maybe one of my favorite characters of all time. That she sort of, it matters to her, it actually matters to her, but she's also realized she has to stop caring if that's not a thing to say.
I think it's an interesting thing, and I wonder if authors are more susceptible to it than other mediums. I always think of, I had the same thing for a female character where I had written her to be this I thought she was the sympathetic person. I thought, if I was to get behind anyone, it would be her. And I thought the male character who was the lead in the book was bloody annoying. And everybody sided with him, which is a strange thing to happen. But I think it's interesting that perhaps TV writers are not subject to the same thing. Like, you watch Succession and everybody in Succession is dreadful to a greater or lesser extent. They're all horrible people, but you will spend time with them all being dreadful. But I wonder if in books, because people spend such an intense amount of time with people, they feel the need to like them, or they prescribe values to them that you otherwise wouldn't. And
also, certainly with my character, as a reader, what those characters are thinking. It's very different to observe someone rather than be inside their heads. I mean, I don't write baddies very well at all, because I find them unlikable, I suppose, pure baddies, and I can't manage that. People have to be more subtle in books, I think, than on telly.
Also, I think that's what stops Succession from being a truly great program. It's very good, it's very well written, but what makes Game of Thrones, until the last couple of series or whatever, it was this idea of good people being bad and bad people being good. With Succession, they're all so rancidly unlikable. I consumed it, but it doesn't stay with me. I don't care, and I haven't invested. And like Lissa worked for years on Father Ted, like one of the greatest sitcoms of all time. Father Ted is not a good.
No, he's brilliant character, isn't he? Yeah.
Very likable, like you like him because you identify, like you do with Ricky Gervais in The Office, with the kind of, we're all that person. We're all that
person. I was also thinking actually, but on telly, the Better Call Saul, which is a brilliantly, I don't know whether you watch it, but the central character is a brilliantly mixed character. You know, that he's both bad and good and the same person, and because that you adore him rather than just appreciate him. Anyway, there we go.
I must watch that, yeah.
Well, you mentioned it a minute ago, Harriet, that your books were, I suppose, packaged or thought of slightly differently a few books ago. Lissa, you've obviously written for children. You've written books outside of the kind of the three we're mainly talking about, that are kind of more family stories and that kind of thing. What's been your kind of writing journey? I hate the word journey, but I can't think of a better one. And did you sort of find yourself maturing into a certain kind of book, writing for a certain kind of reader? Because I suppose the Beloved Girls and stuff like that is more kind of in the mold of like an Elizabeth Jane Howard kind of book, where it's history, and you know what I mean. There's
Thanks.
I
disagree with you. I don't think I'm not as good as Elizabeth Jane
Feel
Howard.
free to put it on the cover.
I started, my first novel was very much rooted in my own experience, although I'm not in it. Some of my experiences are. And I wrote that when I was in my very late 30s. That's when I started it, 39, in fact, precisely. And I wrote that because I was, I had it up to here with television, to be honest, you know, and television is full of, you know, 25-year-olds. I was nearly 40. I thought, I can't carry on doing this. And I'd always wanted to write. I had notebooks and notebooks. And this particular novel I'd started about 8 years before, and had just obsessively been writing the same 3 chapters over and over again. And the big epiphany for me was, what if I wrote chapter 4? That was my big epiphany, and I carried on writing. But so my first 2 books were roughly contemporary, but as far as audience is concerned, they're always for me. They're always the kind of books I like reading. That's my audience, that's me. And my only thought about who's reading it is to make sure that the person who's reading it is seeing what I see, if you see what I mean. So it's precisely trying to precisely convey what I want to be conveyed, but it's the kind of book I like. And if I'm getting bored by something, well, you know, so would anybody. So you know I'm the knife that cuts all the way through in terms of my opinion of the books.
And Harriet, we talked, as I mentioned, if you just look at your website where the books are, the covers tell their own kind of story, didn't they, about how they were positioned and marketed and stuff like that. Did you find that, again, it was a kind of process of maturing into writing a certain type of book? Did you always want to kind of go in this direction, or do you feel like you've not really changed massively, but the way they've been packaged has?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was like 29 when I started writing, and chick lit was a huge market. And I was just never interested in that quite narrow band of what quite a lot of chick lit books are about, which is very hard to write, by the way. And if you read something like Vari McFarlane, who is an extraordinarily good romantic comedy writer, who I would highly recommend, it's really hard to just control your material in that When Harry Met Sally way. You don't meet their parents, you know what I mean? And I was always interested in where people come from, where they're going, what house they grew up in, that sort of thing. I'm less able to control my material in the way Lissa is. And I think because we used to work at the same library, or we still sort of do the same library, you know, I will bash out quite a lot of words, and then they'll quite often just be chucked away. And you know, it's 20 years late, well, not 20 years later, but like 15, 16, 17 years later since I started writing, and I've had 2 kids and I'm older, so just the things that interest me are different. And as Lissa says, it's the books I want to read that I write. So it's funny because some of my earlier books are being reissued with new ebook covers, and it's really enjoyable seeing how they still can fit into the same feel as the books I'm writing now. But at the same time, yeah, you would hope you've had you know, they're not all the same. And that's also not to say one's better than the other, you know.
I just want to say, actually, I mean, my first 2 books were utter flops. I just want to say this now. And part of the problem was that my editor had no idea how to position them, fair enough. And so I used to get some almost weekly phone calls. We're going to edit you as a female Nick Hornby. That was one of them. There was another one. We want people who never buy books to buy a book. So, really? Wouldn't it be nice to start with people who buy books and then build on it? And then they had no, oh God, they had no idea. And you could just see it, yeah, go, you get that, all that excitement, and then you go.
In fairness, the people who never buy books market is huge. I mean, you can crack
It really is, you're right. Yeah, it's what I'm still looking for.
Yeah.
That's who you want to be going for.
I've never thought that as an optimistic ambition, anyway. Yeah.
And another sort of point of commonality in your books, they both you both rely on trips back into the past, in one way or the other. I found it interesting, Harriet, on Instagram, you've kind of opened the curtain a little bit on your process, haven't you, recently, for this book, about how you've you've done it all and the publication process. It'd be really interesting how you both approach that. Listen, we talked about this last year when we spoke for the Bookshop YouTube channel about your kind of research process and the things you go to make sure that the history you're writing about rings true. And you mentioned you work at the similar library. Is there a reason behind that? Because you're this book spans several decades. Are you drawing on different sources to make it?
It's a very useful library, and it's full of stuff. But no, I just use it. I mean, I use it as a lovely office, if you like. No, I mean, I mean, you start, Harriet, about how you do this multi-layered thing, because it's huge. I mean, I love The Beloved Girls, but you're juggling so much. How are you doing it? How are you putting it together?
It's very complicated, isn't it? I imagine there's sort of a corkboard with post-it notes.
Loads of work on it. I spent quite a lot of time writing it. I used to write at the library that Lissa writes at, which is called the London Library, which I'm sure lots of people will have heard of, and it's a private members library just off Piccadilly, and it's cheaper than renting an office. It's like 500 quid a year, and it means you get out of the house and you go and sit somewhere. What the most important thing it did for me is, and a side shoot of that is meeting people like Lissa and like having hilarious chats with other writers, which you don't do when you're at home, sort of in the stairway. I know, can you believe that so, which is like super enjoyable. And the most important thing it did for me is I realized I was allowed to write about some stuff. I was allowed to sit. It's quite a common denominator thing. You sit there, and Thomas Carlyle founded it. Elizabeth Jane Howard used to write there. Georgette Heyer did all her research there. Tennyson, you see really very established biographies and novelists going in the whole time, and anyone can join for 500 quid, so not anyone can join, but you know what I mean. And you realize you are allowed to go and look up these books. You are allowed to broaden your horizons. And that is quite an empowering thing to realize, because you are just like, right, well, I will, I don't know, do a whole section so because I will write a book about butterflies and historical lepidopterists, because I found this whole crazy section in the library that's just about that. And then I'll have a chat with Lissa on the stairs when I'm writing a book set in the Second World War, and she'll mention, what's that amazing Norman Longacre book about Britons in the
How we lived then. How
we lived then. So you'll go off and read that, and you're like, oh my God, so they kept chickens and the rats would eat all the chicken, just the daily life of you realize you're allowed to think all these thoughts. And when you're at home, Jamie, as and I used to work in publishing, I was an editor. A lot of authors I recognize when they've had the sort of quite thin, I've been on my own for too long thinking the same thoughts. Then I moved Bath, so I don't go to the library as much, and I need to make sure I make time for it in my life, global pandemic act, because it is really extraordinary how they're bumping into people and I'm going to wander around. I'm going to read this biography of Peter Cook, who also lived in Hampstead at the same time as the characters I'm writing about in my new book. So, okay, he decorated the house with like a Tiffany lamp and William Morris wallpaper. Of course he did, and floorboards, but it means I'm allowed to know that. So I'll just plonk that all in the book. That's a very woolly long answer, sorry.
You come to a magpie then, you kind of pick up little bits from here and there because you're going around learning things as you go.
Yeah, you don't at home, and I need to I just need to make more time for it.
I grabbed a book just before I left the library today, actually, and I discovered a lovely word in that book, and it was about a Buckinghamshire tower, and it's made of a Buckinghamshire material called clunch. Isn't that great? Clunch. I think it's clay and straw. I'd say clunch is going into that new book without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
Clunch.
Yeah. Anyway, there we go. So that's only today I found her.
Yeah.
And so the last thing I thought I wanted to talk about just before I throw it open to other questions and stuff. If anyone who's watching does have questions, pop on the Q&A. So I just got distracted by my cat. I think he was trying to catch a bird and has failed, so that's good. Outside in the garden, just sort of stalking, in the way they do. So just about your route into writing. So you mentioned you were editor in publishing, and that was kind of your way, and you went through TV. How did you get started? I know people who watch this are always really interested in how writers get started. What's the first thing you said? You had, what was it, 3 chapters sitting there for ages, and you
I had 3 chapters. I think I'd always tried to write. I hadn't actually produced anything at all since I wrote the school pantomime when I was 17, and which I also directed and got called Ken Russell for the whole rest of my school. But nevertheless, I had notebooks full of stuff, but nothing that was published. Or I think I won a travel writing competition for students, but nothing else. I never seemed to be able to finish things, or I couldn't write at length. And I think actually it wasn't in the end until I had something I wanted to write about. And what I wanted to write about is a very, very close friend of mine, who physically close, he lived next door, died in 1994. And I wanted to write about that. And that's what my first book in the end was about. It's called Spencer's List, but it's a sort of funny book about grief, really. And that was my subject. And suddenly it was both my subject plus I realised that the only way I could write at length, because I write in such a compressed way, is to have multiple characters. It hadn't occurred to me before then either. So I found my voice, I found my subject, and I found what I wanted to write about. Anyway, the type of writing I was going to do.
And how was it doing? So I like many people, did the publishing to author move. I left publishing in 2014 because I thought at the time, well, I'm not going to start pitching to agents who I work with while being in the industry. So I thought I'd drop out. But what was it like for you when you started?
This isn't a very good story because I don't sound like a nice person, but I would get sent all these books and I didn't think they were very good. And I got sent a book which later sold for far amount of money, and I thought it was a terrible book. I thought it was really bad. And I realized it was turning me into, and it was written by a quite glamorous person, and it was turning me into quite a kind of bitter person, or just it was starting to affect my job, this idea that I wanted to write, and I tried to write, but I didn't really have much confidence in myself. And I was talking to a friend about this, who was the sales director. I worked at Penguin, and she said, she was quite kind of aggro. She said, you should write a book. Why don't you just get over yourself and give it a go? Like, just get over yourself. And the thing about writing is you have to get over yourself. You have to just forget that other people will hate it. Loads of people hate my books. Loads of people don't like me. You have to just get over that. And that's so hard, and because it's sort of likability thing. And once I got past that, I just thought, yeah, this will start to sort of eat away at me a bit. And now I know, a bit like watching The X Factor or Strictly, you can do all the karaoke you want, but it's actually really hard to stand up and sing a song and be a professional singer, and so I don't slag off other authors now. I will privately when this is over.
Harriet, can you tell me afterwards who that was?
Yeah, definitely.
I think we're all
they're not published now. They're not published now. So
yeah.
That's what I mean. I don't come out very well at it, but yeah, it's true.
I think it's a valid, but
I think my mantra for my first book was, if I don't write it, nobody's going to write it for me. That was my realization that it wasn't going to get done if I didn't do it. It's as simple as that, isn't it?
when we opened the bookshop, our bookshop in Tring, we did a sort of launch event. We had an author there, and I was interviewing him, and he slagged off another author really badly. And I was a complete novice to this whole thing, so it didn't feel as bad as it probably does to you more experienced people. And afterwards, an author who was in the audience came up and said, "That was disgusting."
Wow. Did he flag him off as a person or his books or
his
something?
books? I've even given the gender away. Sorry, he slagged off his books. Yes, wow. It was. Anybody who was there, there may be one or two people who are watching may remember it. I'm not naming names, but. So I've had a couple of questions. Audience, do get some questions in, please. One very long one and one very short one. So I'm going to do the short one. Sarah, actually, it's not a question. But this is another plea to Lissa for more of the series, please.
Oh,
yeah, definitely, Sarah.
Oh God! Well, not the next one, but you never know. That's all I can say. I'm so pleased with the last page of the last one. It seems a pity to resurrect them all, really. But yeah, I know they're in my head. If I find something to write about, I will. Yeah. Is
your next book going to be you going contemporary or modern day? And if so, are you going to address the sort of 2020 hiccup?
That'll be a no, Jamie. So, okay, I mean, my two contemporary books were set in the 1990s, so I don't think I'm quite ready to bring myself up to date. And no, but it's not wartime, is all I can say.
Okay, interesting. I wimped out my latest book. I said it in February 2020, so I don't have to deal with anything. But I can sort of trailing, there's this stuff in the news. Then I just watched the last series of that program, This Way Up, and that sort of drops out again just before things kick off. So there'll be a lot of that. There'll be a lot of people who decide, I can't write my way through this. I'm just going to have to duck out before it happens.
There'll be one or two brilliant books about it.
Yes.
A lot of people ignoring it, I think.
I think you can. I think it's when you take it as a subject, like Martin Amis does 9/11, that becomes part of the section of my book I'm writing now is because it's set in parts. She moves in with her mother during lockdown. I homeschooled my very small children. I didn't see my dad, who is in a nursing home, for 14 months. I'm allowed to take what that's about and not make it into Martin Amis does. No,
yeah.
It's this idea I find quite bewildering that people are like, oh no, we don't touch that. That touched me. It touched you. It touched us all. You were allowed to, as long as you don't say, here are my thoughts on
definitive. Yeah, absolutely.
We're allowed to write about a woman having to move in with her mother in lockdown and what that would have been like. And it's actually been helpful to revisit it, the kind of loo paper thing, the meeting people in the street thing,
I think it's a certain type of author that thinks they can kind of tackle a subject head on. It's normally, I remember when Donald Trump was elected president, Howard Jacobson decided he would tackle it with a book of satire.
That was yes, wasn't that a disaster? I mean, obviously I'm not going to slag off a fellow author, but
but there is a certain type of mentality that thinks what this needs is me to write about it.
It's such a kind of binary, I'm not doing it, I am doing it. Why not? And I can see why This Way Up would have done that, but why not do it where it's one strand of it? Because not to try and take it on would just, also, anyway.
And I think there was an interesting comparison. I was post 9/11, the fiction that came out of that, there were some great books that were kind of adjacent to it, like I think Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann kind of had it in the background while not writing about it. There was a book called Submission that was tangentially about it but not tackling it head on. So there's ways of doing it.
It does feel like the news we're watching with Afghanistan. There's going to be a lot of books in that. There's a lot of kind of. I mean, that's such a disaster for the people of Afghanistan. But I don't know. Let's deal with so Lou Morrish, hello Lissa and Harriet and Jamie. Thank you so much for the evening's talk. I immensely enjoyed reading V for Victory and Old Baggage and Crooked Heart. I'm looking forward to reading The Beloved Girls very much. My question is for both Lissa and Harriet. Are they able to give one single piece of writing advice for a debut author? This is where Lou's coming from, that they wish someone had told them at the start of their writing career. Thank you again, Lou.
kind of covered it a little bit when we were talking about how we got started.
Yes.
My other piece of advice would be write the book just to reinforce it, would be write the book you want to read.
Yes, that's always my baseline. It's for you, you can't write a book for someone else. I don't think. I can't imagine how I would write a book for this nebulous audience out there. I wrote it for me, and the first person to read my books was always my mum, actually. So so I wrote it for me and my mum in a way. But we both have very, very similar taste in literature. But I don't. The other thing is you can't rewrite a blank page. That's the other note somebody else gave me. There has to be something there. Don't be so caught up with making it good that you can't actually squeeze anything out. But yeah, I think that would always be my baseline advice. Write it for yourself.
Is the same experience when you're working on TV? So when you're working on, say, Father Ted or something, were you making that for yourself in the same sort of way?
Oh no. Well, no, because I mean the script. I was producer. I wasn't writing. I wasn't the writer. So what I would get. I mean that's so different. I mean on TV normally in comedy you might get a good script, but you work very, very hard to make it better for the TV. But the big problem with Father Ted was the script was so brilliant that my entire agonized life as a producer was trying to make it as good as the scripts on telly, and there was lots of pain thinking, oh, but they laughed, but they didn't laugh quite as much as they should because it's the best joke in the world ever. There was lots of that. Oh my God. See these grey hairs? This is Father Ted.
Were there places where you thought something was funnier than the laugh it got?
Yes, yeah, they're very specific. The tapping the car when he tries to tap a dent out the car, and there's a tiny dent. He's trying to tap it out, and then it fades to black, and then it fades back, and there's tapping going on. And Dougal says, "You're never going to get it quite right, Ted." And then you cut to the guy, and the description in the script was the first script I ever read of Ted, and it was the funniest description. And Graham Linehan wrote the most brilliant stage direction. It was the funniest script I ever read, and the description made me cry with laughter. So when we played that bit into the studio, because it was the location, yeah, there was a good laugh, but the laugh should have been like this, up and then going on for about 4 minutes, and it was a good laugh, but it wasn't quite good enough. And that's to be honest, I've had many sleepless nights about that ever since, because they laugh quite as much as they should. Anyway,
but that is one of my favourite bits. I mean, that absolutely
it's such a brilliant bit.
So maybe the studio audience reaction was wrong, because that is just
Oh, good. Oh, well, that's all right. I feel better.
What's the here's a question from me actually. What's the last bit of last thing in a book you read that made you cry with laughter? I'll give you my answer first. I read Heart's Invisible Furies, the John Boyne book, on holiday, and the confessional scene. Honestly, I don't know if you've read Heart's Invisible. There's a confessional scene that is honestly the funniest thing I think I've ever experienced in my life, reading or watching. It was extraordinary. So
I think the last one I can remember, it was a reread of Standard Deviation by Catherine Heine, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. And there is the great Thanksgiving scene, the most terrible Thanksgiving dinner in history, which involves a whole origami group turning up, and neighbours, and somebody who comes with a dish of deviled eggs that turned out to be rampant with salmonella, and it's exquisitely put together, and it all ends up with everybody going to casualty. And I think it's a piece of genius that should be in humour collections forevermore. I think
it's a terrific writer. Yeah.
I was going to say that exactly.
Were you?
But it's the earlier part of the book. It's his reaction to living with whatever his wife's called.
Oh yeah, Audra. Yeah, God, she's magnificent.
She's so bonkers, and she's so great. And it's like he lives with, because it's narrated by the seen from the husband's point of view. It's like he lives with this sort of, I don't know, like an elephant that's very beautiful and has a degree. He can't quite work. His reaction to her all the time it's really funny, like properly
That's right. Also, like a security man going round with a major celebrity. That's the other one. She just talks to everyone. She is an absolutely brilliant character. And the other thing that made me laugh, I did an episode of Backlisted Pod on Betty McDonald, who's a writer I love, and rereading one of her books was as ever a pleasure. Called The Pagan Life. Anyway, there we go. Oh, you have to listen, Harriet.
Yeah.
Jamie, have you got an answer for the funny one?
Oh God, I'm terrible at this but I think it's because I read so slowly that whenever there is a joke, I'm sort of always catching up with it. I always just end up saying that something like PG Woodhouse because it always makes me laugh. I can read anything that will make me laugh. I think probably the last two were I've just read the most recent Catherine Heine book, and the name of which escapes me. Early Morning Riser.
Early Morning Riser, yeah.
Yeah, there's some terrific things in that, particularly about how she's talking about her mother after this terrible incident her mother is involved in. That was very funny. And just the subsequent, not the incident, but the descriptions and her relationship with her mother after that, and how her mother tries to sort of shift blame away from herself. And then I'm reading one of the Jackson Lamb books by Mick Herron, and some of the descriptions he has in there very amusing. I'm looking forward to that on TV.
I should read them. I can never read spy books because I always get to the end and the big reveal, and I always think, so which one was he?
Well,
I can never remember who's.
I can empathise with that. I just read a John le Carré book, and I got to the very end. I was like, I recognise the ending of this, and it turned out I'd seen the film.
Oh no!
And I was like, oh, and then I googled it, and I was like, was Ewan McGregor in this? Because I got to the end of it, and I was like, I think I've seen this before, but with Ewan McGregor. And it turned out I'd seen the film, and none of it occurred to me throughout the whole reading.
Like dull faceless men, and there's loads of them, and they all kind of look the same. And I have sort of blind the book and the film. I mean, I know this is completely sacrilegious, but I've tried John le Carré umpteen times. I'm always like, what now?
Yeah.
That being said, I do love a spy book. I don't know. There's something enduring about at a time when we trust authority and we trust almost like government less and less and less. These books where it's very establishment, it's very old school, nothing ever changes, and it's all grey men in suits. And it just feels like it's such an escapist world of something is happening. You don't really know anything about it. So there is something compelling. But the Mick Herron one's very good because they're sort of they're spies, but they're slightly incompetent spies who have been lifted out of the main spy centre.
I've made a note of reading Standard Deviation. I've not read that, but
she's brilliant. Short stories.
There's a little pile of questions. In fact, Alison Barrow, our beloved Alison.
Oh, Alison's watching. Hello,
Hello,
Alison.
Alison. Hello, Anna. Thank you for a great book conversation. Love all the books, Harriet, Lissa, Jamie. Question for Lissa and Harry: which literary character do you wish you had written, and why?
Oh God, you spring this on me, Alison. How am I supposed to come up with something right now? Well, I'm going to say Audra out of Standard Deviation. That gets me off the hook, doesn't it? Yeah. Go on, Harriet.
Miss Millamant from the Castle Chronicles.
Oh yes. Oh, she's wonderful. I read the Cazalet Chronicles during lockdown, and they were absolutely perfect and brilliant.
Governess to the family.
Yeah.
And she gets more and more interesting as the books go on. And she's like quite classic governess in that she's very poor and her entire life is linked. And I think this was the fate of millions and millions of like really clever women. Mm-hmm. And her dress smells. She only has one dress. Yeah. And she's this extraordinarily talented woman and incredibly intelligent. A
brilliant teacher. And the way she teaches is described so well. She's fantastic. Yeah.
Kind. Yeah. And she has so much heart and loves the children, and she loves them, but she's such a wasted life. And you know more and more about her as the books go on, and to have that humanity and that kind of slight repulsion about her and the depth of her understanding, and how she is a towering. She's my favourite character in all literature, Mattie aside.
Oh, thank you very much. But yes, I love the Cazalet Chronicles. Gosh, I devoured them. Yeah.
Yes. A couple of other questions. George and Sheila. Lissa, any prospect of filming Crooked Heart?
Oh, don't get me started. Oh, I'm a very lucky woman that one of my books was taken and made into a film. They're Fine, Sour and Half, and it was a very good film. So there we go. That I'm pretty lucky. But I've had just a succession of hideous nightmares with everything else. And Crooked Heart was bought to make into a film really quite a long time ago now, and it's, you know, the film industry more or less collapsed during lockdown, and there seems to be no prospect. Whenever I look up the name of the lead actress who's supposed to be in it, she's always on some other project, you know, or having a baby or something. So no, not at the moment. I wish. Yeah, never mind.
And a question from Donna: other than your own books, do you have any book recommendations for book club that you've enjoyed? Donna's obviously it's Donna's turn to decide for her book club. I think she's asking you guys to help her. I suspect a standard deviation might be a good one.
I should be answering that to every single question. No, let me have a think. My little book notebook is downstairs, and I'd have to rush and get it because would this be fiction or non-fiction? Is it definitely a fiction book club?
I suspect we're talking fiction here. So.
Okay. Well, this. God, my mind's gone a complete blank. The last book I read that I love was Maupassant's Envie, which is a bit.
Our current one is Echo Chamber by John Boyne, the new John Boyne one.
And what about you, Harriet? You've got one there, haven't you?
I would recommend as a book club choice, but I'm not sure. Yeah, Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, which is all over Instagram and is out in hardback, and I devoured in a couple of days, and is a really good book and a great piece of writing. Ben, do you know, have you got it in the bookshop? And she's a journalist. It's about a woman dealing with an unnamed mental illness from a quite privileged West London family.
What was the name again?
Sorrow and Bliss. And it's really unputdownable. With every day that goes by, I liked it a little bit less. Like I loved it when I was reading. I absolutely loved it. I have more and more questions about it and its honesty. And I would love to be in a book club to discuss it with some people. And I think that's what makes a good book club book. The book that everyone is reading this summer, and I'm on my Streets WhatsApp group in Bath, and people keep asking for copies of it, and I don't want to say, I think this is one of the worst books I've ever read, is Where the Crawdads Sing.
Oh, okay. I'm not saying that.
Great book, though it's got some amazing writing in it, but that seems to me like the reverse of that, in that I've read, you could read a really soapy saga that's a much better piece of writing.
I tell you what I enjoyed, the Feast by Margaret Kennedy, which is a big reissue. It's absolutely gorgeous, set in 1930. The Feast, set in 1930s Cornwall.
You wrote The Constant Nymph.
Yes, she wrote The Constant Nymph, and it's you know, it's everywhere. It's a great big paperback, but I ripped through it in about 2 days, and it's gorgeous and funny and delightful. And I thought it was wonderful. Yeah.
I just read book called The Paper Palace by,
I've heard that's good. Yes,
it's very good. Did you ever watch? It reminds me a lot of the TV show The Affair. It's set in kind of East Coast America, wealthy families, you know, infidelity, all sorts of things going on there, but dark secrets at its heart. It's really good. I had a few questions about it, but I thought it was very the woman who wrote it was involved in The Wire and Sopranos, and it's got a very televisual quality to it. So, but it's very, very good. I enjoyed that.
Okay.
And I sort of raced through that as quickly as I race through anything, as being a terribly, terribly slow reader. So when I say race through, I mean like a week and a half.
Yeah.
For me, that's you know, whipping through something.
Donna has a replied, thank you. I have Sorrow and Bliss on my to be read pile, so that's good to hear. So there you go. So you're on the same wavelength there.
Okay, yeah, it's good.
Good. So Jamie, I'm out of questions. Are you?
Well, the only question I had left really is, what are you both kind of writing next? We had some hints for earlier. Is they confirm stuff, or is there anything to look forward to?
I've got another children's book coming out next year that I wrote during lockdown, rather painfully. Gosh, I hated working at home. You hated working at home. So I've got a book called Wished, which is quite difficult to say actually. Wished, coming out next year, which is for my usual 8 to 12-year-old slot, because I write you know, like I write my grown-up books for now, and I write my children's books for when I was 10. So yeah, that's mine. And then I've just started. I've written about sort of 12,000 words of my next grown-up novel. So I'm a bit of a long way away.
Lissa, you must come and do, because we've made a thing of doing school author visits, but on a virtual basis. So we'll visit 20 schools at the same time, which actually is very efficient, very efficient,
and much less exhausting than.
You can sit in your slippers and I've got a database of about 120 schools now. It's been incredibly positive with them.
And what about you, Harriet? What are you writing?
Well, yeah, it's a book that opens in 1969 and closes after the pandemic, sort of at the end of the pandemic. And it's about the first day and the last day a family arrives and leaves their home.
Oh wow, that's a great idea.
That's a lovely, lovely nuggety centre. Yeah.
And I've made it so that they have no money, but they can just about afford this vast 5-bedroomed house in. And then it's just a story of a family. What happens to them?
Yeah.
So the prologue opens with the last day. She's agreed to show the new owners round.
Very good. I like that.
Oh, that's got movie written all over it.
Yeah.
Nice, thanks. Well, yeah. As is my one, I write loads, and then we'll probably chuck half of it out. But that's what it is at the moment. I'm really loving it. Actually, I'm really liking writing it, so that's a good thing. But I miss the library.
Yeah, come back.
I know.
Brilliant. So,
well,
thank you, everyone. Frankly, the audience, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jamie, for your help, and Harriet. It's a pleasure to meet you, Lissa. It's people start talking the number of times we've done interviews now, but it's always a pleasure. I have to say, I'm a little bit of a you're my hero, really. I adore, frankly, everything you do is just brilliant. So I do apologise, but the first time I've met you, Harriet, and I'm gonna get into your books as well. So. Thank you all for this. This will be on our YouTube channel in the coming days. Our next events, let me just give a quick plug. This time next week, physical event, Linda LaPlante is in Tring. She's
yeah.
It must be. I think it's a book launch, but I'm not sure. I need to double check that. So if you want to meet Linda LaPlante, come to Tring. And there's a few. Ellie Griffiths is coming as well in September. That's a book launch as well. But today I've been addled with my brain because we've been booking book festival stuff, and it's so I'm a little bit phasey about everything, frankly. So I'm just pleased to have such a lovely hour of chat with you guys. So
thank you, and thank you, Jamie, very much.
Thank you.
So flipping nice.
Good.
And you,
see you soon, Harriet.
Thanks ever so much, guys. I'll stop there. So see you soon.
Bye.